guys, welcome back to G Chats with your host G. We are joined in G Spot as always, and I'm so excited for today's episode because we are talking about gut health. And the reason we are talking about it is because I just launched my new product, Gut Revival. If you are watching on YouTube, you can see the product. I'm so excited about this product because the gut and female reproductive organs are so incredibly connected. And we're actually going to be talking about the 4 different systems, if you will, and how the gut health plays a role in those 4 systems and impacts our female reproductive organs and just our bodies as people with female reproductive organs and people with the female sex hormones. So I really wanted to talk about the connection because I feel like it's something not discussed enough and a key component to our bodies. Now, gut health is super important whether you're male or female, but there's these core connections that are missed when we're talking about vaginal infections, when we're talking about fertility, when we're talking about endometriosis. There's a lot of things that we know just briefly on the surface about our bodies when it comes to these things. And something that's left out of the conversation is gut health. And my product is meant to address the gut to then promote optimal health in all of these 4 instances. But I will talk about later in the video when I'm done with the systems, we'll talk about what's in Gut Revival and why it's so important and how it can help. But first, I want to highlight the 4 systems of gut health and then its connections. So the first one is going to be the gut hormone axis because it's super important. A lot of people know that your gut is responsible for your hormones, but not a lot of people understand how or why and how gut dysbiosis, so an imbalance in the gut microbiome, actually affects that negatively. So let's start off with talking about the gut hormone axis or system, which we refer to as the endocrine pathway. So the key thing to remember, and it's one of the most important things that happens, is that we excrete estrogen through our poop. So not all of the estrogen in our body is used. Our bodies are regulating this estrogen, and there's often excess estrogen that we need to get rid of. And how we get rid of it is through our poop. And this is a crucial part of maintaining hormonal balance because you ideally and shouldn't be using all of the estrogen in your body. We want to get rid of any excess estrogen. And how your body does that is through metabolism in the liver. So estrogen gets metabolized in the liver. Something estrogen like estradiol, for example, is metabolized there, and the estrogens are made more water soluble through a process that's called conjugation. And these conjugated estrogens are then secreted into the bile, and then it gets drained into the small intestine. So once it gets drained into the small intestine, the conjugated estrogens are supposed to be excreted through your poop, through your feces. And this is a primary route of estrogen elimination. Up to 65% of estrogens are excreted through our stool. Now, when we're talking about conjugated estrogens, the liver essentially, when it's metabolizing the estrogens, it adds a tag onto them and basically binds them. It connects the estrogens and then moves them to the small intestine so that you can get rid of it through your poop. So that's what it means to be a conjugated estrogen. Now, the key here is that the gut microbiome plays a huge role, and that is through the estrobolome. So the estrobolome is a subset of gut bacteria that produces a very specific enzyme known as beta-glucuronidase. And so this enzyme deconjugates estrogen, so it removes that tag that the liver had stuck on to get rid of the estrogen. So this enzyme removes that tag, and deconjugated estrogen can then be reabsorbed into the bloodstream through enterohepatic circulation, and this then raises estrogen levels all over again. So you might be thinking, okay, this bad guy here in this scenario is the enzyme. That's what I feel like any logical person would think. And this is honestly something that we see in the health and wellness community, just in general, when we're talking about even hormones. It's like cortisol, that's the bad guy. And it's like, This enzyme is not the bad guy. This enzyme is actually super important, and it's so critical for estrogen balance because the estrobolome, the group of gut bacteria that produces the beta glucuronidase, is normal and essential. The body naturally recycles a portion of estrogen for reuse, and this enzyme helps regulate it. So it's not a bad guy. It's not an actual bad guy. You want this enzyme. The problem arises when this enzyme activity is too high and it leads to an excess of deconjugation. So it's just too much of it, which is then too much removing of the tag that's gotten conjugated by the liver. And this disrupts the conjugation of the estrogen within the gut. And this means that estrogens that were meant to be excreted through your poop now get reabsorbed into the bloodstream, and this increases the systemic estrogen within the body. And so how you might be thinking, okay, so what causes the overproduction of this enzyme? Well, it's none other than a disrupted gut microbiome, and it can be from antibiotics, poor diet, low fiber and high fat diet, and they can all lead to the overproduction of beta glucuronidase, and this results in excess estrogen recirculation, and this contributes to estrogen dominance, and that can make symptoms in PMS worse, heavy periods, PMDD, and hormone-related conditions like endometriosis and even fibroids, PCOS. So it can make all of these conditions worse. So that is just one way that estrobolome is super, super important, and it's not talked about enough. So the culprit here is gut dysbiosis. So it affects the estrobolome and this enzyme activity and can allow for you to be reabsorbing too much estrogen and then in turn having estrogen dominance. But there's other ways that gut dysbiosis also affects the hormones. One of those ways is it affects nutrient absorption for hormone synthesis. So the gut must absorb key vitamins and minerals when you're eating, such as your B vitamins, your zinc, your magnesium. However, nutrient absorption is limited when you have gut dysbiosis. So your body struggles to absorb these key vitamins and minerals. And when your body struggles to absorb these key vitamins and minerals, you now have trouble synthesizing not just estrogen, but also progesterone and DHEA. So that is another layer here. And then a third layer to gut dysbiosis and hormones is that gut dysbiosis can impact insulin and its resistance, which can also impact your androgen levels, like your testosterone. So when you have gut dysbiosis, you have insulin resistance because insulin resistance is often triggered by gut inflammation and the dysbiosis, which leads to a rise of insulin. And when you have a rise of insulin, you have a rise of androgens like testosterone, for example, especially in people with PCOS. And you have a decreased amount of your sex hormone binding globulin, which is your SHBG, and there's more free testosterone in this case. And this can then cause irregular cycles and ovulation, which means just like you're not ovulating at all, and worsened hormonal acne, increased facial hair, which are some of the classical, if you will, symptoms of PCOS, but also, you can experience these things without having PCOS. I just want to note that. So your hormones and your gut are incredibly tied together, whether it's affecting your estrogen through the estrobolome or affecting your testosterone through insulin resistance or affecting progesterone synthesis. So there's a lot of different ways that your hormones are being affected when your gut is imbalanced. So that is the first key system. System number 2 is the gut immune axis. So a lot of people have heard this, but the gut associated lymphoid tissue, GALT, makes up 70% of your immune system. 70% of your immune system is right in your gut. So gut health in particular, when we're talking about female reproductive health, the gut health determines how the immune system responds to pathogens in the vagina, seminal fluid, sperm, and pregnancy, which a lot of people don't know. So there's a couple of ways in how the immune system works to respond to essentially these foreign entities, because pathogens like bacterial infections like BV, or even when you're having intercourse, unprotected intercourse, and your body comes into contact with HIV, comes into contact with STIs, your body are just a guy's regular penile microbiome. Those are foreign pathogens. How your body reacts to it all stems from the GALT and immune connection here. So there's immune tolerance. So number one, the immune systems in the gut, like dendritic cells, macrophages, T regulatory cells, they all help train the immune system to differentiate between friend and foe. So essentially, what you want from your body, you want your body, your immune system, to be so strong that it can differentiate what you do want and what you don't want. So something like pregnancy, you do want. Ideally, you want your body to be able to recognize that and say, oh, we want to keep it. But something like HPV, for example, you want your body to be like, oh no, we don't want that, and to be able to be activated and start trying to defend you from it. So the immune cells in the gut help train your immune system on what we do want and what we don't want. And this is critical in something like pregnancy, where tolerance to fetal DNA, which half of it is foreign because half of it is yours and the other half is not. And so this tolerance to pregnancy is required for a stable and healthy pregnancy. And poor gut function can lead to hyper reactivity within the immune system, basically meaning that the immune system is so reactive to literally anything that comes into your body. And that is now linked to early miscarriages, infertility, implantation failure. So immune tolerance is a key core concept when we're talking about the gut health, determining how the immune system responds to pathogens in the vagina, seminal fluid, sperm, and pregnancy. Another way that it responds to these foreign entities is through inflammation and autoimmunity. So chronic gut inflammation from something like SIBO, a leaky gut, food intolerance increases systemic cytokines like IL-6 and TNF alpha. And these are all pro-inflammatory cytokines. And basically, those pro-inflammatory cytokines are chemical messengers your immune system uses to start up inflammation. And this contributes to a number of things. Number one is endometriosis progression. So endometriosis is now understood to be a chronic inflammatory disease. It's not just misplaced uterine tissue, and it's characterized by progesterone resistance, immune dysfunction, and cytokine imbalance. And so IL-6 and TNF alpha, they have very, very important roles. So TNF alpha promotes angiogenesis, which is basically the formation of blood vessels within the endometriotic lesions that we see on different parts of the bodies. It also contributes to the adhesion of the endometrial-like cells outside of the uterus. Because remember, historically, people thought, oh, it's just endometrial tissue, like the tissue inside of the uterus, just growing outside of the uterus. That's not the case. These are cells that are similar to the endometrial tissue, and this TNF alpha promotes the adhesion of these endometrial-like cells to stick together, bind together, and grow a lesion outside of the uterus. But it's not uterine tissue. It's similar to the tissue, and the behavior is similar, but it's abnormal because of inflammation and immune dysfunction. And so there's also neuroinflammation and pain sensitization. And we also see IL-6, which drives a subset of T helper cells to be imbalanced. And this makes the immune system unable to clear the lesions, because normally if your body was forming these lesions, your T helper cells should be able to recognize that and try to clear it. But there's a dysfunction and an imbalance when you have endometriosis that it can't clear these lesions on its own. So there's enhanced estrogen production within these lesions through aromatase expression. And this correlates with lesion progression and infertility severity, because these lesions can grow on the reproductive organs, but it's not limited to the reproductive organs. They can grow on the diaphragm, they can grow on the lungs, they can grow on the brain. So we've seen these lesions growing in other parts of the body, but they can also impact female reproductive organs because they can grow on the ovaries, grow on the fallopian tubes, grow on the uterus. So that is just one way that it can contribute to a very popular condition when we're talking about female reproductive health. Although it's not a strictly reproductive disease, it's been treated that way and talked about in that way, but we know now that it's not. It's truly an inflammatory issue, and that inflammatory issue does really stem from the gut. And so another way that gut inflammation through the gut estrogen immune axis is something like Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune hypothyroidism. And so the two that we talked about, IL-6 and TNF alpha, they damage thyroid tissue and they interfere with ovarian hormone production. They interfere with your egg quality, so they can decrease egg quality and increase miscarriage risk. They affect gut permeability, so they can cause a leaky gut, which allows food proteins, LPS, and bacterial antigens to enter circulation. And this can trigger molecular mimicry. And this is where the immune system, unfortunately, mistakes thyroid tissue for invaders and starts to attack the thyroid tissue, which is a classic autoimmune disease. And so we have other autoimmune diseases like lupus and conditions in general that affect fertility, because the chronic IL-6 and TNF alpha elevation can suppress ovarian function. They can disrupt implantation by making the endometrium less receptive. They can damage the egg and embryo quality through oxidative stress. They can create autoantibodies to attack sperm, the embryo, or even uterine tissue. And they can promote progesterone resistance, making the luteal phase unstable. So there's a number of ways then that they can affect infertility, and all of these inflammatory markers are stemming from gut dysbiosis and inflammation within the gut. And another way that the gut and immune system are connected is through mucosal immunity. So there's antibodies within the mucosal barriers, and one of those antibodies is immunoglobulin A, IgA. I will refer to it as IgA for the rest of this segment. And this antibody is very, very crucial because it is responsible for neutralizing pathogens, preventing adhesion of these pathogens, and it maintains tolerance to commensal pathogens. So something like E. coli, for example, like our gut is not sterile. We all have E. coli living in our gut. The reason why it shouldn't be doing anything or causing any problems is because our antibody is keeping it at bay. It's keeping it in check. It's making sure that these bad guys that are normal in our gut stay at a normal level and don't do anything and don't take over. So it's basically policing your gut microbiome and your mucosal barriers. But the important thing to remember is that IgA and these antibodies don't just live in the mucosal barrier in the gut. They live in the mucosal barrier across all mucosal systems within our body. So we have mucosal barriers in the bladder, we have mucosal barriers in the vagina, we have mucosal barriers in the gut. So these antibodies are protecting us across all the mucosal barriers, not just the gut. So when you disrupt the mucosal barrier in the antibody that's in the gut, you then in turn disrupt the antibody function in the vagina, in the bladder, in the other parts of your body. And why this matters is because the antibodies that are in the mucosal barrier in your vagina are there to protect you from BV, there to protect you from yeast infections. When it's in the bladder, it's there to protect you from a UTI. But if it gets messed up, starting with the gut, you now are affecting the mucosal barriers across the entire mucosal system, the mucosal immune system. So your immune system can be compromised in your vagina and in your bladder, stemming from the immune system being compromised, the mucosal barrier being compromised within the gut. So that's why it's really important to feed your mucosal immunity with the right things and take care of it, because it's not just, oh, I'm messing up the mucosal barrier in the gut. You mess with that, you are messing with the vagina, the uterus, and the bladder's mucosal integrity as well. So when we talk about the vagina's mucosal barrier, studies have shown that lower IgA levels in women with BV or recurrent infections are very, very common when gut dysbiosis is also present. So again, it further emphasized that these infections are something that happens alongside gut dysbiosis. When we're talking about the bladder, in recurrent UTI models, reduced urinary IgA is associated with gut dysbiosis and poor mucosal priming. There's germ-free mice or antibiotic-treated animals that have been shown to stop and blunt IgA responses in the bladder epithelium. So it supports the logic of antibodies being dysfunctioned across all mucosal barriers. And then when we talk about the uterus and endometrium, there's emerging data that suggests that the endometrial immune system is impacted by gut-primed immune cells, and IgA levels in the cervical and uterine fluids are altered in dysbiotic states or inflammatory conditions. So this all further supports the mucosal barrier and the immune system and this connection between the gut and the immune system. And number 3, for the next system, we have the gut vaginal microbiome axis. So vaginal microbiomes are seated when we are born and they are maintained throughout our life, but the gut always acts as a reservoir for many, many microbes that colonize the vagina. So we have to talk, this is a great place to talk about BV and yeast infections and the connection to the gut. So how does BV and the pathogens that are associated with BV, like Gardnerella, Prevotella, how do these pathogens start from the gut and get to the vagina? So Gardnerella vaginalis and anaerobic bacteria like Prevotella, for example, they cause BV and they're often found in the gut. So there's a number of ways that they can migrate. Number 1 is through the perineum space, the space between your butthole and your vagina. So unlike UTIs, which also have a systemic spread, BV primarily arises from migration across the perineum. So anaerobes and Gardnerella move from the gut and the anal region, and they travel to the vaginal area. However, this isn't just about poor hygiene. The repeated presence and overgrowth of these bacteria in the vagina often reflect that there's ongoing abundance of dysbiosis within the gut. And there's often a systemic spread that can happen. It's less common, but it is possible. And research is starting to suggest that there's a connection and a systemic spread through the bloodstream or the lymphatics that can occur, especially in chronic or resistant BV cases. Although evidence for systemic translocation of anaerobes is still limited compared to UTI pathogens, it is possible that the pathogens are spreading internally without migrating. Like, it's not a physical migration from the butthole to the vagina. It can happen internally and seed into the vagina. That's limited because we know in the UTI, that's like a primary way and an emerging way that we're seeing UTIs happening. But it's still present, and we do see a lot of cases of people with BV having gut dysbiosis. We just know right now that the primary way of BV going to the vagina and these pathogens getting to the vagina is through the perineum space. So it is a physical translocation as we know today. And recurring BV indicates gut reservoirs. So chronic BV often implies persistent gut dysbiosis, continuously seeding BV pathogens into the vagina. And this is very, very similar for Candida overgrowth, yeast infections essentially traveling from the gut to the vagina. So Candida albicans is the most common yeast infection species that lives naturally in small amounts in the gut. However, we know that gut dysbiosis or antibiotic use causes an overgrowth of Candida, and from here it moves to the vagina through the perineum space directly, perineal migration. So it's the main pathway of Candida easily colonizing the vagina, particularly after antibiotic overuse. So now there's this overgrowth within your gut and it's a part of your rectal mucosa, and this can spread through the perineum and to the vaginal mucosa essentially. And we have a less common way, but it's emerging. There is a bloodstream pathway where Candida enters the systemic circulation if the gut permeability is severe. However, I do want to note that it is necessary to remember that systemic spread is typically associated with like severe immune compromise or hospitalization. So this isn't something like if the candida infection, the yeast infection is spreading from the bloodstream, it is a more severe case. We know that BV and yeast infection like to, for a lack of a better word, crawl to the vagina and cause vaginal infections. So we know that to be the case. And we do know that there is plenty of research that emphasizes that people with recurring yeast infections and recurring BV typically have an overgrowth of these pathogens within the gut. So there's strong indication that ongoing gut dysbiosis, candida overgrowth, and compromised vaginal microbiomes are all connected. And so healing the gut is super important for things like BV and yeast infections because addressing the gut microbiome imbalance is fundamental due to us knowing that without healing the gut, BV and yeast pathogens will continuously recolonize the vagina and the vaginal microbiome. And antibiotics or antifungals alone won't permanently solve BV or yeast infections because gut reservoirs remain intact. So restoring gut health and vaginal microbiome health simultaneously stops the cycle. It's not just about killing the bad, it's about restoring the good and healing the gut. So you don't ever really heal anything from taking the antibiotics or the antifungal. You are killing the overgrowth, and that is necessary, and that's a necessary step. That's like step 1 of the process, but there's still step 2, step 3, step 4 of healing your gut and healing your vaginal microbiome. And that's often left out of the conversation. So how you can do that healing is through lactobacillus support. Gut microbiomes influence systemic immune function, as we talked about, nutrient absorption, as we talked about, metabolic environment, as we talked about, all of which impact whether lactobacillus, the good bacteria within the vagina, can actually survive. So certain strains like Lactobacillus rhamnosus, Lactobacillus reuteri, Lactobacillus crispatus, taken orally can improve vaginal pH and restore microbial dominance. Research has proven that time and time again. So probiotics, even the most abundant probiotic in the gut, like Saccharomyces boulardii, which is inside of gut revival, very, very important to restoring gut health. We also know that there is an estrogen connection here because estrogen enhances glycogen production in the vaginal epithelial cells, and glycogen is broken down into lactic acid by the good bacteria Lactobacillus, and it maintains the acidic vaginal pH. And when our gut or hormonal health is off, estrogen levels drop. And when estrogen levels drop, there's less glycogen. And when glycogen is less produced, there's higher vaginal pH and there's more BV and more yeast infections. So that is the gut vagina connection. And then the last system that we need to talk about is the gut urinary tract axis. So this is similar to the BV UTI, like vaginal bacterial infection, except there is a core difference here. So traditionally, the UTI explanation was the butthole to bladder theory, in the same way that we know right now that Gardnerella and yeast infections, so vaginal specific pathogens, migrate from the butthole to the vagina. And that was traditionally what we thought for E. coli, for UTIs. We thought that E. coli from the gut exits through the anus and it travels a short distance from the perineum space to the urethra, and the bacteria ascends into the bladder and causes a UTI. And this direct contamination route is valid. It is, and we know it to be true. However, it's not the full picture, especially in people with recurrent UTIs. So there's a deeper mechanism, and newer research is suggesting that UTI causing bacteria doesn't just hop from the butthole to the vagina and specifically the urethral opening, climb up the urethra and then cause a UTI within the bladder. Instead, uropathogenic bacteria like E. coli or Klebsiella, Enterococcus, like all of these different pathogens, originate from an overgrowth and an imbalanced gut microbiome, and they take multiple hidden pathways to infect the bladder, not just like climbing from the butthole to the vagina. So here's how it works. Number 1, we know, as I just mentioned, gut dysbiosis is the root cause. So everyone has E. coli in their gut. Literally everyone has E. coli in their gut, but not all E. coli causes UTIs. Some strains are uropathogenic, which we refer to as UPEC, and they have special traits that allow them to survive in urine, invade bladder cells, and form biofilms within the bladder. And a disrupted gut microbiome, dysbiosis, caused by antibiotics, diet, stress, inflammation, these issues can then allow UTI causing strains to overgrow within the gut. And so once this overgrowth happens, the gut now acts as a reservoir, and it's constantly seeding the urinary tract with new infections because it's holding all of these bad guys. So one of the ways that happens, well, the way that it happens is known as translocation pathways, how UTI bacteria travels. So there's, 4 different ways that I have on my list that we know of scientifically right now. Number 1 is hematogenous spread, and that is the bloodstream route. So when the gut lining is inflamed through something like a leaky gut, uropathogenic bacteria can then enter the bloodstream, and these bacteria can then seed into the kidneys and the bladder through the blood. And an example of this is Enterococcus is a common UTI pathogen that is also found in the bloodstream during infections. So there's research that is highlighting this bloodstream route. There's also more research that's highlighting number 2, the lymphatic spread. So the lymphatic system drains toxins, as most of you know, and bacteria from the gut. And if there's gut inflammation, then the pathogenic bacteria can spread through the lymphatic channels to nearby organs, and that nearby organ includes the bladder. And this is less direct, but it's a clinically suspected route of bladder colonization right now. Number 3 is direct migration via the enterourinary pathway. So what that means is some intestinal bacteria like uropathogenic E. coli can migrate directly from the intestines to the bladder by moving through the gut wall, like out of the gut wall and into the urinary tract. Isn't that amazing? It's almost like teleporting, if you will. And this might explain why some people with recurrent UTIs, they test positive for the same exact UTI strain for months or even years, and the bacteria persists in the gut and keeps reseeding the bladder. It's something that's left out of the conversation way too often. And number 4, we have bacterial persistence and biofilms within the bladder. So once in the bladder, uropathogenic E. coli UPEC can invade the bladder lining and form intracellular biofilms, and antibiotics are temporarily suppressing symptoms, but they're not actively killing off the pathogen because the pathogens are protected by the biofilm that they formed within the urinary tract. So this is what leads to recurring UTIs. This is basically the explanation right now that scientifically makes sense for recurring urinary tract infections, even with good hygiene, because if UTIs were only caused by the anus to the vagina spread, if that traditional thought was the only reason that people get UTIs, well, then better hygiene would eliminate UTIs forever. And we know that even with perfect hygiene, people are still getting UTIs. So we know that hygiene is not the issue, because if it is an external transfer, something of, it's going from the butthole to the vagina, if we knew that external transfer was the key, hygiene would get rid of UTIs. Like, nobody would have UTIs if they had spotless hygiene, like perfect hygiene. And we just know that that's not the case. Like, we know that that's not the case because we know that many people, especially those with recurrent UTIs, still get them despite great hygiene practices. Like, we get told to shower after you poop, wipe front to back, pee after sex. And there's people who go insane saying, I do all of that and I still get my UTIs. Why? That's what made researchers say, well, yeah, true. Why? Why do you keep getting UTIs if you're doing all the things correctly? And that's because science is telling us it's not just the external contamination of, oh, you're flossing bacteria from your butthole to your vagina. Like if that was the case, then if you did everything right, then hygiene would eliminate UTIs, and it doesn't. So what we do know is that women with gut dysbiosis, SIBO, IBS, or even antibiotic overuse are at a higher risk of recurrent UTIs. E. coli doesn't always need direct contact because it can travel, and science shows us it can travel through the blood, the lymphatic system, or directly through intestinal permeability. And even if you kill bladder bacteria with antibiotics, the gut still remains a reservoir because the bacteria that causes UTIs originates from the gut. The E. coli is coming from the gut, and that is why UTIs keep coming back. So it's a core part of the treatment with somebody with recurrent UTIs. And some clinical evidence and studies that support the gut urinary axis. We know that number one, studies show that 90% of recurrent UTI patients have gut dysbiosis, basically meaning reduced diversity, overgrowth of pathogens, low beneficial bacteria like lactobacillus. There's also evidence that shows that fecal microbiota transplants, FMT, basically where they take good, healthy gut poop, fecal matter, healthy poop from somebody who has a healthy gut microbiome, and then they basically transplant it. They put that healthy gut bacteria and healthy gut poop inside of somebody with gut dysbiosis. Studies have shown us that it's successfully eliminated UTIs, which is amazing. There's also probiotic therapy evidence where probiotics restore the gut and vaginal microbiome, which then reduces the recurrence of UTIs more effectively than antibiotics alone. And then we also see evidence that a leaky gut and systemic inflammation have been linked to higher rates of UTIs due to the migration of bacteria from the gut. So all of this matters for preventing UTIs because it's beyond hygiene at this point, and we know that, and gut health is key to resolving chronic urinary tract infections, and understanding the gut urinary axis highlights that recurring UTIs are rarely just about hygiene or external contamination, and instead they're a clear indicator of gut dysbiosis, which is an imbalance and overgrowth of bad bacteria with reduced good bacteria within the gut. So instead of focusing on wiping front to back and not wearing thongs and avoiding tight underwear and all of this stuff, people with recurring UTIs need to focus on healing the gut microbiome, reducing the gut permeability and inflammation, addressing biofilms in the bladder, and avoiding antibiotic overuse. So those are the 4 key systems of the gut, and then people with female reproductive organs, like how it's connected to female reproductive health. So really quickly, before we end this podcast, I want to talk about our gut revival, and I want to talk about the ingredients in here and how it can help with all of the things that we talked about. So now that you know that gut health is super, super important, and we talked about everything from enzyme activity, everything from inflammation to the immune system to mucosal barrier, let's talk about how this truly cares for your gut, because this is a comprehensive drink powder supplement. This is not a greens powder. This is not something that's meant to taste all fancy. It is unflavored. It does not have a super fancy taste, and alone it's unflavored. So like if you just mix this in water, it doesn't have like a good taste. It's not meant to be flavored. The ingredients are as is. There is not additional ingredients in here, additional flavors, nothing. What you see on the label is what you get, and that is because this is truly meant to be a clinical product that heals your gut from within. So the first ingredient that we have is L-glutamine. We have 3,000 milligrams of it, and this is essential for gut lining repair. So we want to help with the gut lining cells, repair a leaky gut, and we want to strengthen intestinal barrier integrity. So we talked about if you have a weak intestinal barrier, the gut, there's evidence showing that the E. coli that causes UTIs can actually, when I said like teleport to the bladder, it can seed right into your urinary tract through poor intestinal barrier. And so L-glutamine helps support your intestinal barrier and heal the intestinal lining and heal a leaky gut. So permeability is super, super important for all of the things that we talked about today. And L-glutamine is helpful with that. We then have polyphenols, our fiber-bound polyphenols, and this delivers antioxidants and dietary fiber directly to the gut microbiome. The science shows us that polyphenols positively shift gut microbiome towards beneficial bacteria like lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, which is found in both of our vaginal probiotics with Clarity and with Harmony. So you really should be taking this alongside our 2 probiotics for vaginal health, and this suppresses pathogenic bacteria that's linked to BV and UTIs. We also have a gluten enzyme formula. So this supports the complete digestion of gluten peptides that triggers inflammation and gut irritation. So this will help the ingredient, the gluten enzyme formulation will help prevent gluten-related gut permeability, indirectly reducing the migration of pathogens to the urinary and vaginal microbiomes, and help support with any discomfort that any of you have with gluten intolerances and inflammation that happens with gluten intake. So we also have our Microbiome X grapefruit and orange fruit extract. The role of these is that flavonoids modulate gut microbiomes and they enhance the short chain fatty acids, SCFA, and their production. So SCFA reduces gut inflammation, it strengthens gut lining, and it improves immunity, all of which are important for everything we talked about in today's episode. We have Saccharomyces boulardii, which is the probiotic. In here, it's a probiotic yeast that's super important to restoring a healthy gut microbiome, and it prevents antibiotic-associated dysbiosis. So if you do take antibiotics, but you are taking this helps reduce your risk of having gut dysbiosis after antibiotic use, and it enhances the gut immune response. So this has been proven, Saccharomyces boulardii has been proven effective in clinical studies for preventing antibiotic-induced dysbiosis and recurrent yeast infections by directly competing against candida and other pathogens. We have licorice root extract, which is anti-inflammatory and gut soothing. We have our fiber aid, which is essentially a prebiotic that selectively stimulates good bacteria, which is what you want. So this can enhance the growth of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, both of which are in with Clarity and with Harmony. And it is crucial for suppressing pathogens that cause UTIs, BV, and yeast infections. We also have some other soothing agents like ginger root extract, marshmallow root extract, and slippery elm. And these botanicals are known to soothe an irritated gut mucosa and reduce inflammation, both of which are super important. And traditional and clinical evidence supports their ability to calm the digestive tract irritation, improve the gut mucosal integrity, and reduce inflammation that can exacerbate dysbiosis. So ultimately, the all in all, like too long don't read of all of this, or too long don't listen of all of this, is gut revival supports your gut health and your vaginal health and your urinary health, your immune health, your inflammatory responses in a number of ways. Number one, it strengthens the gut barrier because it reduces a leaky gut and it prevents pathogens from translocating. It balances gut flora by enhancing the growth of beneficial bacteria like lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. It reduces inflammation by alleviating chronic gut inflammation that contributes to pathogen overgrowth, and it supports immunity. So it improves gut immune function, which is critical for preventing recurrent infections. So this is a scientifically supported product that helps with all 4 of the systems that we talked about today. It'll support hormone health, it'll support immune health, it supports the vaginal axis, and it supports the urinary axis. So I hope that this video was a comprehensive way of understanding just how important gut health is for all of the different ways of your reproductive tract. And I hope that you all look into Gut Revival and combine it. We are going to launch a mix and match of your bundle, but I hope that you guys give Gut Revival a try. I absolutely love this product. It is, I want to say arguably, my favorite product I've launched thus far because it is such a good product. I cannot speak highly enough about this product. I absolutely love it. I'm my own customer. I do have a like Gianna's favorites of like how I like to drink it that we're releasing next week. But I absolutely love this product. I hope you guys get your hands on this. I hope you guys learned today just how important your gut is, and I hope that you support your gut with gut revivals. So thank you all for tuning into this sort of long episode. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.